The Jeff Gabriel Connection.
Michael Schlossman, what's up? How are you?
Hey, Jeff, how are you? Good to see
I'm
you.
doing pretty good. I'm doing pretty good. It's been a while since I've seen you, and I'm really excited to have you back to the show. I think it's apropos, given what's going on in the world and your expertise. For those that are listening, Michael Schlossman is living proof that people can not only change, but they can transform. According to Michael, all that's needed is desired direction and dedication. In 2001, the trajectory of Michael's life dramatically changed when a work-related injury led to a 10-year battle with addiction to prescription medication. The battle cost him his company, his marriage, and nearly his own life. Michael, how are you? Welcome. How are you today?
I'm doing much better than 2001. I appreciate that. Now,
I know that was a rough time. That was a rough time for you.
yes, it was. And you and I have known each other forever, so you kind of lived through this with me.
You know, obviously I was not in the thick of things when you were in the thick of things. I was off on the side and we were talking, but I've had some experience with some friends, an old girlfriend, some dear friends of mine that have had addiction problems. I wanted to approach this because I think a lot of people are dealing with addiction either themselves, indirectly through friends, people that they know, or they're unsure. And I wanted tonight to try and, with your assistance, try and clarify what is addiction, why we
Sure.
think people do get addicted to things. Before we get into that, maybe you can just tell me a little about what you're doing right now and give a little background for people. So,
Sure.
what's been going on with you?
So I reached rock bottom, as you know, around 2010 when I tried to take my own life, and fortunately I survived that attempt and got help. It took me a long time to get help. I silently suffered with addiction for about 31 years. And all the while, it was very confusing because on the outside, I had a very successful life. I'm an attorney, former film producer. I used to travel around the world and make documentaries for HBO and Discovery and National Geographic. And I married the woman of my dreams when I was about 32 years old and had a little baby girl, lived in Greenwich, Connecticut, and had an office in LA, an office in New York City. And, so on the outside, everything looked great. And the hard truth is that I was dying. I was dying on the inside. I was dying spiritually and emotionally and physically and mentally, and I was a mess. And so to back up for a second and to answer your question, the word addiction gets thrown around a lot, especially in the last couple of years with the opioid epidemic. And so I think it's helpful to define what addiction is, right? So addiction at its core is any time I reach outside of myself for an external remedy to satisfy an internal condition, and that remedy becomes the central fact of my life. I'll do anything to get it. So it could be drugs, it could be alcohol, it could be food, it could be shopping, It could be sex, it could be gambling, it could be anything. And let's face it, we all sort of walk around with something that bothers us all the time, which is fear-based and insecure thoughts that manifest itself in all sorts of ways, and pride and greed and gluttony and lust and envy and sloth. But for most people, normal coping mechanisms work. For someone like me, the external remedy became something that I was willing to do absolutely anything for, and it destroyed my life.
All right. Well, I think in today's world and the culture, and given how stressful and social media imposed on us, I think a lot of people are dealing with a number of different addictions, but also a lot of noise. So people are trying to quiet their mind in many, many different ways. So some people are on social media getting a dopamine hit from TikTok or Facebook or Instagram or whatever it is, or they want to have the next best material item. Someone might be working really hard to build this material life that they really don't want, but they think people on the outside want to see them having, like a Donald Trump type thing. But I think that there's a lot of noise going on, and I think what you're saying is that the addiction is a way for people to quiet the noise. Would that be a correct assumption, you think?
I think that's fair. So, and you're right. When you and I grew up, it was bad enough. We had constant advertising coming at us, but it was only basically in print and in the television medium, maybe a little bit of radio. Nowadays, it's coming at us from everywhere. I call it the if-only culture. right? If I
Right.
only have that, then I'd be okay. If I only have that, then I'd be okay, right? And so social media, all sorts of different media come at us constantly that if you take this pill, everything will be okay. If you drink this beer, everything will be okay. If you eat this food, everything will be okay. If you only have this car, then you could get the girl. And
Right.
there's nothing inherently wrong with that. I'm not saying that we should shun all material goods. What I'm saying is when it becomes the great obsession of life, that's the only way that I can cope with myself. And as you said, quiet the noise. Well, then it becomes a problem.
A lot of young people are going to watch or listen in on the show, and some of them are dealing with addiction right now, and they don't even know it.
Yeah.
You were dealing with addiction on a very, very high level at a very young age. And talk about like when you first, you had that first aha moment that, using a substance turned into an abusive moment, but it felt good to you, and it relieved some tension for you. And
Oh boy.
it actually started you down, a path that was not great, not good for you.
The first time I can remember that is 12 years old. And I'm not sure if you were there that day, but a bunch of us were playing touch football after middle school one day. And I remember that we took a break from the football game, and a bunch of guys, about 8 of us or 10 of us, we were standing around in a circle. And I had never really drank or tried drugs before. And I heard the same message as you did. You remember when we were in elementary school and they had the poster and there was a bum smoking a cigarette and it said, "Smoking is glamorous." And I
Yeah,
remember
guys
thinking,
with the
like,
really wrinkled face. Yeah.
yeah, that's the worst thing that could happen to you is you turn into a cigarette smoker. So that's kind of where my mindset was. And I was a fairly good kid. I had straight A's back then. And believe it or not, I was the responsible one. I was the youngest of 3 children. And but here's the deal. I didn't know what I suffered from until I no longer suffered from it anymore. And what happened was in that circle, someone started passing around a joint, and the joint got to me first, and I took a hit of it. And I remember the effect like it was yesterday. I'm 55, going on 56 right now. At 12 years old, I can remember it like it was yesterday. It was as if all the fear and anxiety and noise that you're describing melted out of my body. And I felt something called peace, ease, and comfort for the first time in my life. And eventually, a couple of minutes later, someone was passing around a fifth, and I took a hit off of it. And I remember that warm feeling and feeling just free and comforted for the first time. So I didn't even know that I suffered from anxiety or all this noise that was going on into my head until it was suddenly gone. And my story, I could get into the whole thing, is essentially chasing that experience for 31 years till I was 43 years old, without knowing it, by the way.
Right. You never said to myself, you said to yourself, like, this is going to turn into a problem. This is an issue. And I think,
Never.
what I understand, indirectly, obviously I'm not an expert in this, but I think it's like an aha moment when someone recognizes or they're being guided by an expert that they're actually self-medicating. On their own, they're taking either it's a prescription drug or it's a street drug or they're alcohol and they're drinking and they're doing something on their own and they don't recognize that they're doing something to numb. I mean, it's not even recreational anymore. They're home by themselves to either numb or to calm themselves or to ease themselves down. And that self-medicating turns into a new avenue, a new direction that you start driving down on a regular. And for the addictive person, I mean, not every person is going to self-medicate and it's going to turn into an unreasonable situation, right? I mean, why do some people go down that path and some people don't? Is the brain amplified? Is it genetics? Is it environment? Is it a combination? Is it a conflux of the three of them? What do you think that is?
I have my own theory that, scientists have studied this for years and still don't have really a common denominator, a common answer, except for there's a part of the brain called the nucleus accumbens. And that's what people call the.
What was that? What was that called again?
It's called the nucleus accumbens, and it's a complex word that means basically the pleasure center of the brain. So every
Right.
time you do something and you feel pleasure, it's hitting the nucleus accumbens. And the theory goes that in addicts and alcoholics, that the nucleus accumbens just goes haywire, and will do absolutely anything to seek pleasure. And if you ask a lot of addicts what their drug of choice is, they'll just say more. And so this
Right.
happens from a very early age. At some point I was in a crib, and I'm assuming that I cried because I wanted food, or I needed to be changed, or I wanted to be comforted or something. And I learned a lesson, like most alcoholics and addicts do, that if I cry and stomp my feet, then someone will bring me something that will get me pleasure. This is why most addicts and alcoholics are manipulative and dishonest, because we'll do
Hmm.
anything to keep feeding that thing. So it gets worse, Jeff, because as you start putting these chemicals into your body to hit the bell in the nucleus accumbens, the brain itself loses the ability to produce its own feel good chemicals. So after the high or the drunk is over, your brain needs more of it, and it needs more of it.
Right.
And because it's a progressive disease, what worked for you yesterday, the volume of what worked for you yesterday won't work for you. So at 12 years old, a little hit off a joint and a pop off a fifth was enough for me. By the time I was
Mm.
43 years old, I was doing unspeakable amounts of drugs and back to drinking, quite frankly.
Well, I want to hear about that a little bit later, but I wanted to. I definitely want to hear about that because that's entertaining. So it's somewhat because I know you.
I never thought it was possible to escape this thing. I really didn't. I didn't think, because you and I are sitting here. It's nighttime. We're coming into the summer, and we're both the same age, and we grew up together. And Jeff, I suffered really bad for 31 years, and I thought that the end had come in 2010. And I'm so grateful to you for having me on and talking about this, because I've made it my mission in life to try to destigmatize this and help people who normally won't get help to get some help. Because I didn't know that
Listen,
there was a way out. I really didn't know.
you know what? I think, I've known you for a long time. I've known people with addiction before. I understand that, the ego's involved and letting the ego go and what people think of you and what you've went through. But, your life's been transformative, and I think it's exemplary, and I think people should hear about it, and that's why I'm having you on. Look, and there's a lot of people that suffer with addiction and talk about addiction, but you're someone that's near and dear and and personal to me, and I know that there's a lot of people that are suffering from it. And I think it's
Yeah.
important now. A lot more people are suffering than COVID. I mean, we had this incredible pandemic, but there was also this silent pandemic that was going on during COVID. I had a friend of mine, or an indirect friend of mine. He OD'd from heroin during COVID with this whole,
Sorry to hear that.
fentanyl thing that was going on in the drugs. There's over 60,000 overdose-related, drug-related, opiate-related deaths in the United States every year. There's over 30,000 suicides. Multiply that worldwide. There's millions of people that are dying from either opiate or suicide or drug-related. And it's all stemming, not just environmental, not just genetic, it's really how your brain is wired. I don't want to get into it too deep, but some people's brains are just more amplified than others. They take things in, they get scared, they get fear, they get the fight or flight mechanism like kicks in, and they really, really want to calm it down. And, I think it's also important to mention that it's okay to not always have the need to feel comfortable, that we have to learn to sometimes be uncomfortable and learn to have a dialogue with that. I mean, I'm sure you can add to that. I'm just speaking impromptu of my own experience.
No, I agree with you. Now in hindsight, I had very, very poor coping mechanisms. I really didn't have an objective moral value. I really didn't have great role models. I had resentments all over the place. My parents, that you know very well, are elderly now. They're 86 and 84 years old. They're two of my best friends, but I had a horrible relationship with them growing up, and so I was a sitting duck for this thing. I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out why me, and how did this happen to me. I finally was able to put that aside years ago and just say, you know what, it happened, and we need to do something about it. And I'm so grateful to be on the other side now.
Yeah, I mean, look, Mike, it's amazing. I knew you when you were going through that, and look, everybody goes through their trials and tribulations. Everybody knows that life is hard, and everybody wants to say, I want to be happy. But what really is happiness? And I think
Right.
that part of happiness is going through the troubles and experiences, maybe not to the depth that you did, but the struggles, and trying to find a resiliency, to be able to be resilient, to deal with the amplification of life, the fear in life, the problems that we have. And I think through your process, and a lot of people that go through this, they learn how to become resilient.
Right.
And I think this is really important. I want to mention this because young people that are listening to this, they're really confused. Some of them are scared. Some of them are trying to figure themselves out. There's a reflection to social media that they're never going to be able to meet. They're never going to be able to live up to what they see. They're already, in their minds, they're already failing, coming out of the chute, and they're just sitting in their bedroom playing video games, smoking pot, trying to figure it out.
Yep.
And they're nervous about it. So I think that, or they're concerned about it, or they're not concerned about it, and they don't know, and they're just really in this chaotic position. So I think the recognizing is one thing. Maybe you could just take us through when finally someone gets to the point where they've had enough, the people around them have had enough, it becomes a rock bottom situation where they are finally ready, they can succumb, they can surrender to some sort of process to make themselves better. Like, share that with us.
Yeah. So, denial and delusion are two very, very difficult concepts to explain to somebody. Like, why would somebody keep putting something into their body that's literally destroying their life and is going to kill them and is ruining everyone's lives around them? And so the great question is, why do addicts and alcoholics go back to that which is killing us? We're the only animal on earth that does that. Like squirrels look at the old me and go, like, dude, you're really messed up, man. Like, what are you doing? So
Well, they don't have access to drugs.
Yeah. So what happens, Jeff, is exactly what you said. Eventually somebody hits their own rock bottom. And it's important not to compare bottoms with other people, because some people have physical bottoms, some people have emotional bottoms, some people have financial bottoms. A bottom is a bottom. A bottom is when you have something called a moment of clarity, and all the BS, Jeff, just disappears. And a guy like me is able to put his pride aside and call someone like you and say, hey, buddy, I'm in a lot of trouble. Can you help me? Right? That takes an incredible, incredible amount of pain to go through. And I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, quite frankly. Mm-hmm. So when they're finally ready, to answer your question, there's tons and tons and tons of help out there. I was afraid to pick up the phone and call 911, right? And so what happened to me is I stuffed it down for so long that eventually the only way out for me was to put myself 6 feet under, which is crazy. So
just do me a favor, because there's a lot of people that have suicidal thoughts. Even in day-to-day life, they're not addicted. I mean, life's chaotic. You're just under a lot of pressure. What do you call that again when you have suicidal thoughts? You dramatize it in your brain.
Yeah, suicidal ideation, suicidal thoughts. Sure.
Right.
So a lot of people are passive, some of them are active.
Right. So a lot of people have that. They're not going to admit that, but they wake up. It's a stressful day. I'm like, how am I going to pay this bill? My boss hates me. My car got wrecked. My wife won't sleep with me anymore. Yeah. I'm fucking. I'm in chaos. Yeah. But what took you from that place of just thinking about it to actually doing it? Because that's a heavy emotion. And it's real. Yeah. And it's gotta feel horrible. I mean, like, beyond horrible.
And so for me, it didn't happen in an instant. It's not like I woke up one day and just said, hey, I'm going to kill myself. It was years of excruciating emotional pain. Losing financial stuff, losing the house, the car is being taken away, my wife telling me that she wanted a divorce, my daughter thinking that I was an animal and she was afraid of me. That was kind of the last straw, quite frankly. Because this little girl, she's 17 now. She's graduating high school in a couple of weeks and about to go off to college. And she was 5.5 at the time. And she came home one day, and I sort of lumbered down the stairs to say hello to her. And I got down on one knee to hug her, and she ran away from me. And she was hiding behind a chair. And when I found her, she had her hands up in the air, protecting herself from me, like in a defensive posture. And my mind at that moment, like the circuit breaker blew. And I thought to myself, someone needs to remove me from the face of the earth so that she can live a great life. That was the sick thought that I had. I understand it's a sick thought. So not only
No, I get it.
here's the scary thing is what people should really be watching out for is, yes, suicidal ideation of any kind is something that there's help for and therapy and all sorts of things. And you can walk into any hospital and tell them, I thought I was going to get in trouble, which stopped me from doing it. I grew up with this thing that suicide is like an offense and you would get in trouble and wind up in jail. And I don't know where I got that from, but there's a lot of help. But what's really, really dangerous, if someone out there has suicidal thoughts plus a plan that's actually actionable. You know what I'm saying? I had a plan that was actionable. I knew exactly how I was going to do it, and I planned it very, very carefully. So if you're at that point, you can come back from that. You can come back from that, brother and sister. You can come back from that. All you have to do is pick up the phone and ask a friend for help, ask your family for help, call the police or the fire department or an ambulance or ask for help, walk into any hospital, call the suicide prevention hotline. Do anything that you can to pull yourself out of that hole, because here's what happens to a person like me. You actually lose all hope. The excuses to live stop coming. Because for a long time, I used to wake up every day and find an excuse to live, and it was my wife or my daughter or this or that or my dogs or whatever. And eventually, when they hated me, and there was absolutely nothing left, and I had no idea how I was going to pay the bills, and the cars were being taken away, and the house was being taken away, and I'm just the worst father in the history of the world, I lost all hope, and that's a very grim place to be. Very hard to come out of that hole.
Mm. Well, it's really, I can tell you, it's really brave of you to talk about, and it's an example in life that, if people are going to listen to this, should hear that, you can turn your life around and you can really look for a path to recovery. And there's a lot of people out there that are dealing, especially with the stress of the pandemic.
I'm going to tell you a story. You know how I finally figured out that I was an alcoholic and an addict? No. So I was laying in bed one day.
You looked in the mirror.
Sick, with what's that?
I said you looked in the mirror.
Withdrawal. I mean, I was in bad shape. I was having DTs. I was having, what they call the shakes. I was in really bad shape. I was essentially, I was. So I'm laying in bed one day because I couldn't get out of bed, and I'm watching a rerun of The West Wing. And there was a character on The West Wing. He was the chief of staff, Leo McGarry. And he was having a flashback to when he was struggling with alcohol and pills. And he was the first character, he was the first person, to me, it was a character, but he was the first person that I ever related to. I could understand exactly what he was talking about dropping the ice into the scotch just right. I understood the combination of the pills and the alcohol and all. And I started to understand at that moment, this was a couple of years before I asked for help, but I started to understand at that moment who I actually was. And it took a long time for that to sink in. Right.
And then when did you start coming to terms with it, in the sense being able to finding some acceptance?
It's a great question. So I'll tell you. So I wound up going to an addiction treatment center, and I wound up going for about 2 months, and then doing an outpatient program for another 2 months. So about 4 months into recovery, I hadn't used a substance or drank any alcohol for about 4 months, and it was tough, by the way. It was very tough because when you pull all that stuff off, a nervous and anxious and fearful human being, the nerve endings go crazy and they want to be fed. This is called post-acute withdrawal. So I had a panic attack during this period. I thought it was a heart attack, and I was rushed to the hospital, and I had never had a panic attack before. And I was sitting in a meeting, and I was staring at the wall. And I suddenly realized why my ex-wife used to say to me, "Why do you wake up every morning and look for someone to hate?" I suddenly realized that my whole thinking was fear-based and insecure and based on resentments. And because I was always afraid that you were going to hurt, interfere, or threaten my own personal safety or my financial safety or my safety as a man, my pride, that my gut reaction was to make fun of you, put you down, excoriate you, hate you, whatever the deal was.
Is that a foundation for why a lot of people, emotionally, like, you can have a genetic predisposition physically to be addicted to alcohol and drugs. It just feels great and you take it, but there's always an emotional backdrop behind that as well too. And I guess what I'm saying is that do a lot of people come from the same place that you're describing when it comes to addiction?
Oh, so most alcoholics and addicts come from exactly the same place. And what I found out over the time, you talked about a privileged background. I did have a privileged background. I did, and it confused me because I thought alcoholics were people that lived under a bridge, and so I was ashamed. And I didn't know that you could ask for help. I really didn't. If there's something I really want to get across to people is my life changed from one simple thing. I found out that anything is possible when I raise my hand and ask for help. Anything. And my intellectual pride, that privileged background, prevented me from reaching outside because God forbid you knew that I don't know, right? So most people in who are in recovery describe exactly what I'm describing. They feel lonely in a crowded room. Their entire thinking is fear-based and insecure to a great extent. They're selfish and self-centered beyond reason. We are defiant by our very nature. There are certain things that most alcoholics and addicts have. Sure.
Are there people that can redirect themselves? Obviously, they may not know that they're redirecting themselves, but they say, before they go down that path where things just become
Yeah.
or tornado, before they slide into oblivion, you see those people that are drinking or at a party, they were in a bathroom doing drugs and they're just doing so much, like you look into their eyes and they're just like black holes, like they're gone. Like, we were talking before, like it's not enough, but are there people, or is there a way that people can recognize in themselves and maybe be able to take another turn before
Sure.
or people that are built this way chemically in their minds, they're just going to go down this path. It's going to be a train wreck no matter what.
Well,
They're going to have to get help.
The answer is sure. And the answer is I was so sure about that I thought that was me. And I thought that the reaction to me destroying my life and everybody else's life around me and trying to commit suicide was a grave overreaction. That I'm not an alcoholic or an addict. I was just chemically dependent. And so I don't know a single person that was using and drinking in reckless abandon, went to the amusement park, woke up one day and said, "Hey, I'm going to give it all up and get sober and go find God." No, I don't. I don't know anyone that happened to.
Right. Right.
I mean, one of the things I love about you is a lot about human psychology and human behavior, and we only repel the force coming at us with the force we think is necessary to repel that force. So if someone takes out a pea shooter, you don't take out an Abrams tank, right? So I tried to repel the force with a pea shooter at first. I just won't drink or use. And then you try to repel it with something else, and then you try to repel. And finally, Jeff, I realized whatever I got to do, because this thing is unlike anything I've ever seen in my life. And this thing tried to kill me with my daughter in the next room. So I've got to throw everything.
What's amazing, I just got to stop you for a second, because if you listen to you now talking, or we've been talking for a long time since you've recovered. I mean, you're a lawyer, you run a rehab or a transition program where people come out of rehab and they're transitioning back into normal life. You're thinking about opening up another type of center. You're a life coach, and you help people through transition and therapy. So, I mean, look at what you've been able to come back from such a, when you would feel so sad and so ashamed of yourself and so horrible and such low self-esteem, to such a strong, well-rounded person again. So, I mean, it's possible, it's doable. And I think what should also be mentioned, it's very, very difficult, but isn't it like less than 5% of people are able to stay sober once they go through rehab? Is that percentage right, or am I way off?
Well, the percentage is right, but the percentage is a little bit skewed, because that's the percentage of just everybody that goes. Of the people who go and really give recovery a shot, most people do recover.
It takes a few times. It takes a few times, though, in some cases.
I only went once. I'm not sure it has to happen more of that, but I was the benefit of being a little bit older, hitting a very, very, very low bottom by the way, losing everything and hitting a low bottom turned out to be the greatest gift I ever got. Now, I wish I didn't hurt the people I hurt along the way. And I've spent my life trying to make that right, and I'll continue to spend my life trying to make that right. But that bottom was called the gift of desperation, and I had no choice, Jeff. I had gone from that privileged life that you were talking about down to 3 bags of clothes, homeless, being served divorce papers, and temporarily losing custody of my daughter, and ruining my business. And so in a rehab in Tamarack, Florida. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know anything. I didn't know what was going to come next in life. So I was very lucky that I had no choice but to try recovery. I really had no choice. I didn't know if it was going to work, but I knew it had better work because nothing else had ever worked. But you brought up a really interesting question. Are there people who can just stop? Sure, I've met them. And like I said,
Yeah.
I thought I was one of them, and it turned out that I wasn't. But that lesson was very, very, very hard learned.
I haven't met many people that can just stop, that have hit rock bottom and got close. They've always got to go into a program. But one thing that's like also super interesting about, can we talk about the program? I mean, I don't know if it's off limits or not. I know that it's the 12-step program. You typically need to be in it to talk about it. But one of the things that I know that was important to you and part of your transition and maybe an aha moment was you finding a higher power emotionally in your mind, finding God. And a lot of people would be resilient to that. Look, I'm not I don't go to temple, I don't go to church. I'm not a religious character, obviously, but it's something that, and I'm not promoting that. I want to because I don't know what people like or what their passions are about religion or not. But what I'm saying is many people that get into a program do develop a relationship that's something that's beyond them, and it helps to pull them and draw them in a direction that's more positive and eases them, gives them a natural dopamine hit, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. So
maybe you want to explain that.
It's actually a very practical answer, and I think the answer is very different than what most people think. 2 years before the bottom hit in 2008, I had gone to a detox. And all of this was suggested to me. And I said, thanks, but no thanks. And I told them where they could go shove it. You know what I'm saying? Because
you don't want to be in a room with other people that have. Wait, you guys have the problem. I got no problem here, buddy. I'm fine. I'm fine.
I was not ready to hear any of this. And the reason is, Jeff, is because I still had road ahead of me. I still had game. I still had money. I still had a way out. Because to me, all I needed to do was make more money, and if I made more money, the anxiety would go away. If the anxiety would go away, I wouldn't drink and use so much. So it was a brilliant theory. It turned out to be absolutely not true. So by the time I hit rock bottom, I was willing to accept certain suggestions and certain principles, again, simply because I was so desperate and I had no choice but to try it. Now, the other thing was I was very fortunate because I grew up in an agnostic Jewish household with very, very well-meaning parents, but I was a seeker from the time I was very little. And you and I have talked about this story many times. It's sort of a funny story. And in 1977, I saw Star Wars for the first time. I was 11 years old. And the concept of the Force blew me away. It actually answered a lot of questions for me. And I was the kind of kid, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have Google or anything. So I remember going to our local library and looking up Eastern philosophy and coming across Taoism. And I later found out that George Lucas based the Force on Taoist principles. And so I developed a passion for comparative theology. I went through Taoism and Buddhism and Hinduism, and I dabbled in Christianity, all the while trying to understand my own Judaism. So I came in, I presented myself into recovery sort of open-minded to the fact that there might be something else out there. Now, here's the reason why it's important. Not because it's a religious program and not because anyone's trying to make a pastor, priest, or rabbi or imam out of me. You listen to what I tried to do on my own, right, to escape this alcoholism. Every single method that I tried that came out of this brain failed. Now, by the way, the reason why that was so confounding to me is because this brain, like you said, had done great things. I was an attorney. I was a filmmaker. I traveled around the world. I did all these things. I had a great house. I married the woman of my dreams. I had a daughter. Right. I led a very privileged life. So how could this fail? But I finally had to accept the fact that my own power failed. And so the theory goes, I had to find a power greater than myself to solve my problem. That kind of made sense to me. So
Right.
again, if it was just a theory presented to me in good times, I probably would have said what I said in 2008. I don't think so. But in
Right.
2010, I was willing to say, all right, tell me more about that. How does that work? And Jeff, here's the crazy thing. Sometimes people ask me, do I have proof that God exists? Right? Well, I actually do, but here's the greatest proof. I got down on my knees in December of 2010, and I've never metaphorically gotten off of them. And I've been sober now almost 12 years. I can't
Wow.
explain that for a guy who couldn't stop drinking and using for 31 years.
Isn't it really about, they say that they use the word, or, in the program or through therapy, you use the word surrender, and surrender is really, cracking
Yeah.
the ego in half with a sledgehammer where, like you people talk and they don't want to listen, or they need to be the expert. Like, when
Yeah.
do you put the expert down? When do you want to listen? And when is it okay to be wrong? And when is it okay for someone to give you, when are you able to receive help? And that's
Yeah.
really what's about, that surrendering to that higher power, to that bigger existence to you, that gratitude, and why finding the gratitude is so important. I just really feel that this story is really important for young people. It's a difficult thing for a person to always recognize. Sometimes bad things need to happen before you get help. But I think listening to this story is so key, so clutch, and for you to be willing to share it is extremely brave. Like, it doesn't bother you at all. Like, you know what I'm saying? Which is great. Like, a lot of people wouldn't want to share something that is this personal. They wouldn't want to share suicide and your transition through. I mean, we've known each other for almost 50 years. We've known each other since we've been little children, and our friendship is just as strong as it was, obviously in a much different way when we were playing Star Trek as kids on the bus. But no, I'm saying that as a person can come back, and a good friend can be non-judgmental and supportive. I guess my point in saying that is that if people have issues, your true friends are going to be around for you. Your true friends are going to listen, and your true friends are going to want to be there for you and be happy for you. It doesn't have to be a
Yeah.
completely shameful existence or a shameful process. I mean,
Yeah.
our friend, our friendship has gotten stronger through this.
It has. Yeah. No, it's very
Yeah,
true.
so
You talked about surrender. What I finally surrendered to, Jeff, was the fact that I don't know everything. The fact that I don't
right,
know what's best for me. And that was a
right.
huge admission. And I didn't even know it was a huge admission until I finally started saying things like that. Like, someone just tell me what to do. Just please help me.
Right,
Because I
right.
was
Well,
finally out of answers and just willing to be quiet and listen.
right. Well, look, it's totally amazing, and
Yeah.
having you here as an example, I'm really grateful the opportunity to continue to have these discussions, because it helps me. I think something I want to point out is whether you're a person that is self-medicating, you're in addiction, or you're haven't reached a point where your life has become so unmanageable that you need help, that in one shape or form, everybody is running, at least in this culture, in this country, that people are running in one direction or another away from something. We talked about whether it's shopping, they're using
Yeah.
food, it's sex. We're all fear-based. We're fear-based animals, and that fight or flight, reaction is always a moments away from our house of cards, falling down. For me, when I had angst, or I was a kid and I was scared about maybe going to school the next day, or I woke up with a lot of angst, my sort of drug, or my sort of tick, was to just talk, and to talk to whoever would just listen to me. I remember being like a teenager in my early 20s when I had a lot of angst. I wasn't, a big drinker, I wasn't a big smoker or anything like that, but my emotional crutch was just talking. And I think talking is a good thing, as much as you can get off your plate and someone will listen to you. But my point in saying is that everybody is dealing with some sort of emotional or mental chaos, and it metastasizes and morphs into different things for different people. For you, it was, suicide and recovery and finding your way back. For me, it was just talking to anybody that would, freaking listen to me till I got calm enough. And the point is that
Yeah.
we're all under a little bit of duress, all of us. We all need to give each other like a little bit of a break.
Yeah.
So maybe you could share now what, you've been doing with some of the people that you're working with, and, what you're seeing now in the world of addiction. Is it more pronounced than it's ever been before? Do you see people recovering, in a more efficient way? I mean, what's going on? Is there anything different going on?
I'm not sure if there's anything different. There seems to be more and more mental health issues that are what we call co-occurring along with the alcoholism and the addiction. And quite honestly, people are a little confused as to why that's happening. A lot of personality disorders. Certainly, there's always going to be anxiety and depression and those types of things. But serious personality disorders, schizoaffective, bipolar, borderline, all sorts of things that are popping up. And so recovery has become a little bit more complicated. But the basic thing has been around forever, that certain people, for whatever reason, are genetically predisposed to addiction. And that has not changed. What is changing also rapidly is the addictive nature of the substances out there and the deadly nature of the substances out there. You don't see old fentanyl addicts walking around.
Right.
Before our time, back in the 60s and 70s, there were older heroin addicts walking around. You don't see that anymore because they're dying in droves, like you said, in their teens and their 20s.
Why are they cutting drugs with fentanyl?
I don't know.
What is it? I mean, because obviously you take too much of that. I mean, that's what you use when you want to put somebody under anesthesia in the hospital when they're getting an operation, and basically you take too much of it. Your body just goes to sleep and doesn't even want to wake up.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm not going to get into that because it's a complex subject, but I just thought that there's enough on our plate here right now. I don't want to.
I really don't understand why a drug dealer would want to kill his own customer. But the fact remains is that it is happening, and it happens every single day. In the time that you and I are on this podcast, a dozen people will die of an overdose.
How many people?
At least a dozen. It's crazy.
It's well, they talk about that we had a pandemic. There was another silent pandemic that was going on, and that was before the pandemic. A lot of suicide and a lot of drug overdoses were going on during the pandemic, and they're happening, after the pandemic. I'm not going to get into the issues with the drug companies and the opiates that they produce and they market, and the designer drugs. But I think the point is that through this conversation today, that we're all susceptible in one way potentially to addiction. We're all susceptible to the chaos in life. And the good thing is that there's a way to see yourself through it, to get help, to not be ashamed. And I think that you're an incredible. You're an incredible example of that. I did want to ask you one thing. Now that as we get closer to maybe wrapping this up a little bit, I did want to ask you. Now that you've been sober now for how many years? 12?
Coming up on 12 years. Yeah.
Wow. Congratulations. So how is your coping mechanisms now? Like when something bad happens to you now? I mean, you've been doing this for a long time. You've been sober for 12 years. You're productive. You got a business. You have a girlfriend. You have a beautiful daughter. That old life you've learned from is behind you. What happens now when Michael gets freaked out or Michael gets scared?
It's a great question. I'll try to make this as simple as possible. I've learned not to self-evaluate. If you ask me how I'm doing, my answer, and I'm saying this quite truthfully, would be ask my ex-wife, my parents, my girlfriend, and my daughter how I'm doing. Ask my friends how I'm doing. Ask my staff how I'm doing. Ask my colleagues how I'm doing. And I'll let that be the testimony, be the proof for recovery and what's possible in recovery. So do I still get anxious once in a while? Do I still get sad once in a while? Of course I do. I'm a human being. Do I still get fearful once in a while? Sure, of course. We just went through a very fearful period in our country, and we're in a continuing fearful period in our country. So it's difficult sometimes not to get sucked into it. But the way that I approach things is admittedly very different, very, very different. And just it turns out that the human mind is only capable of two thought systems, one based in fear and one based in love. And I've been successful at getting out of the fear-based and insecure mindset and having what's called a spiritual experience and getting into a mindset that is mostly about empathy and compassion and tolerance and love and kindness and selflessness and honesty and all those types of things. Does it flip back over sometimes? Of course it does. Of course it does. But I've been blessed to have tools now and friends and support groups and openness and honesty, and most of all, to help other people out of the hole. And one of the things one of the big transitions for me in the last year is I really have wanted to go back and help people like me, really help executives and professionals and well-educated people and entrepreneurs and business owners, because believe it or not, it's a very underserved population. And the reason it's a very underserved population is because of that thing called intellectual pride. Like I'll have a guy approach me at a business breakfast, and he'll say, by the way, can I talk to you for a second? And we go in the corner and he whispers to me that he thinks he's drinking too much. Mm-hmm. We talk for a little bit. I tell him my story, and I set up an appointment with him. Next thing I know, he cancels the appointment because he's cured. Everything's all fine. And that's quite, that's typical. Because this thing, gets us into what I was talking about, this delusionary and state of denial where everything's okay and I really don't want to deal with it. I'll just keep kicking the can down the street and I'll figure it out later. Because right now I got to get back to work. I got to get back to business. I have bills to pay. And I get that. I do. I understand that. So I've developed this transformational coaching business, which is really dedicated to helping people who are at the upper echelon of society, because believe it or not, they're one of the subculture of America that really needs the help the most. And since that's where I came from, I can understand the mindset, and so it helps to break down the barriers.
I'm sure that person in that stature, coming from a high-end corporate, background or a certain sort of family life, there's probably a lot of coveting going on because they're professionals and they're super intelligent and they really can't, let go. Yeah. So I think that the service that, you're offering, look, you take care of a lot of young people too, but this is a service geared to those people.
I do.
So, I mean, maybe we'll share that at the end of the podcast. We'll get your information. We'll post that somewhere. I had a last question that I think is really important. Do you believe that when someone is using a substance to socially lubricate, or emotionally lubricate, whatever you want to call it, and it makes them feel good and it puts them into a more relaxing state, when they're engaging with people or engaging with life? And obviously this happens a lot when people are out socially at restaurants. Do you think that where is it become non-acceptable? Is there an acceptable part of that? Because you're not just always drinking you're feeling good, but you're drinking so you can deal, even on a low level. Mm-hmm. So when does it become an inflection point, do you think, I want people to really notice that, to recognize it.
Listen, drinking is quite normal. Alcohol has been around since the beginning of time, and if you haven't noticed, the bars are full on a Friday or Saturday night with people celebrating, not celebrating, soaking their woes, Woo-hoo! Just there to have a drink, hanging out, having fun, picking up whatever the deal is. It's quite normal. It crosses a magical red line when it becomes the great obsession. When it literally becomes the central fact of your life and you will do absolutely anything to get, quote unquote, your fix or your drink or whatever it is, to stop the shaking, to stop the depression, to stop the anxiety, to stop the noise, to stop the racing thoughts, and you cannot live without it. And the next thing you know, you have minimized your life, you've isolated, you're no longer having good relationships anymore, you're destroying things in your life. Maybe you're not showing up to work, or maybe you're not showing up to work as effective as you were before. Your family is suffering, you're a prey to misery and depression, all sorts of things. And you feel awful. You feel like you're completely useless and there's absolutely no way out. That's when it becomes a huge problem. Now, there are warning signs way before that. If people's moods change, if suddenly they stop showing up, if all of a sudden they become erratic in their behavior, if they're spending money in odd ways. There's all sorts of red flags that you could catch a lot earlier, and then we can intervene on that and try to get them some help earlier on, because as the expression goes, there's no reason that the elevator has to go all the way to the bottom. You can get off at any floor.
But really what you're saying translates into the world, into the word, or the tip of the word is unmanageable.
Yes, that's exactly what happens.
When things start, when you can't manage your life and it starts affecting your friendships, starts
Yes.
affecting your relationships, and starts affecting not only your survival, but the survival of the person you might be in a partnership with. And how long that person also, I mean, I'm not going to get into the codependent side of it, but there's a whole other addiction and a codependent side to the people that stay around when you drag that person down into the depths of hell and the abyss as well. But I mean, we can go on, but I think that what you've said tonight, what you've shared tonight, especially, I mean, I care about older people too, but I really care about young people and teenagers that are so challenged today with, I mean, I think I mentioned to you before that, the reflection through the social media that the people they feel like a failure, they feel, worthless out of the gate. And I think that part of the challenge is for young people, not only dealing with addiction or potential addiction, is just finding the strength to push through, to be able to experience things that will give them a better self-worth, a better sense of themselves. And I think that through this discussion today, you've definitely shared that.
I appreciate the opportunity, Jeff. It's so good. Thank you.
I appreciate you being here. Thanks, Mike.
The Jeff Gabriel Connection.